Deeper Than Indigo. And that's our next session with Jenny Balfour-Paul in conversation with Bappaditya Biswas. Parallelly at 12:10, we will be starting the debutantes ball. We've had to delay the start. We'll be starting debutantes ball at the Western Quadrangle. I've been told that a few of you have had trouble finding the Western Quadrangle. In case that is true, this is the eastern face that we are sitting and that we're facing. The Western Quadrangle is behind this face. So you take this path and turn around and you follow the arrows. Just saying. Maybe now, welcome Jenny and Bappaditya.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming over for this session. Jenny needs no introduction. We are all very well versed with our work. So I'll straight away go to the book and we'll start the conversation about the book.
Sure, I do need introduction.
Jenny Balfour-Paul is recognized internationally as the leading authority on Indigo. Her doctoral thesis, Indigo in the Arab World, recorded traditions that had almost completely vanished. She popularized this famous blue dye stuff with her book, Indigo.
Thank you. Yes.
Jenny, when I first got the book in my hand and I looked at the title, Deeper Than Indigo, the first thing that came to my mind was the literal Bengali translation of this word. And honestly, Sham, which is Krishna, is blue, and Ghana means the darkest blue, and Ghanasham is Krishna. So, and as I kept reading the book, somehow the imagery of Radha and Krishna kept coming in my mind because it's always a sense of separation and union. So why did you name this book Deeper Than Indigo?
I just want to thank the organisers first before we start. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Oddly, I didn't name the book Deeper Than Indigo for many years. This is a bit windy, isn't it? Because I didn't want to confuse it with my other books, which really are about indigo, the substance. I wrote a book on indigo in the Arab world. I then wrote a book about indigo worldwide for the British Museum Press, Indigo, Egyptian Mummies to Blue Jeans, covering what I thought was sort of the story of indigo as we think of it, the substance. And this book, because it has goes beyond indigo for me to something deeper, is actually about the metaphorical aspect of indigo as well as the reality. And I felt if indigo was in the title, it would be confusing. So I didn't have it for ages, and then I changed it just towards the end. It's the best thing I ever did because it's a natural progression of my work to something else, to indigo's meaning of unity and connectedness. And oddly, I was so happy when you said that yesterday about the translation, because whenever I give a slide talk, and you'll see it'll be rolling behind as I'm talking, sometimes I talk with images because it's such a colourful subject, I always end my talks with an image of Krishna, but sort of subconsciously, and then you said, well, actually the translation is in fact Krishna. So I'm very happy about that, because it's in my mind all the time.
I think, in fact, every sphere of your work, the word indigo has kind of hounded you or hunted you.
Yes.
And has never left you.
Not at all. And actually, it's a complete journey for me. And it's one single word that has actually led to the last 15 years of my life. And the fact that I'm sitting here. And can I read the beginning of the book?
Yeah, please do.
Because in a way, that summarizes why I'm here. Back in Kolkata, yet again. I can't stay away from Bengal and Kolkata. It feels like home. Last time I came, I was introduced to somebody. We wound down the window of the car, somebody who didn't know me, and he put his head in the window and said, "Welcome home." Didn't know me, and I thought, yeah, that's just about it. Of course, I'm an outsider as well in this complex city, but I just feel at home in Kolkata in a way I don't in any other Indian city. Must be because of Thomas Machell. So this is how my book begins. The first chapter, just the beginning of the first chapter, sets the scene, and it's called Meeting Thomas. And I begin with a quote from Tagore. Let your life lightly dance on the edges of time, like dew on the tip of a leaf. I first met Thomas at the very end of the 20th century. The attraction was instant, and when I parted from him in London, I felt physically sick. Back home in the West Country, I immersed myself, that's the West Country of England, I immersed myself in preparations for the last Christmas of the century. I made mince pies, wrapped presents, and dangled over the fireplace my great-great-grandmother's quaint Victorian fairies, almost succeeding in putting Thomas out of my mind. Almost, but not quite. Every so often I caught myself thinking about him. The pungent spices of mulled wine transported me back, not only to the East Indies, but also to the lingering flavours of our meeting. I recalled his hints of exotic travels in far-off lands, and his longing for someone to heed his words before the century was over. I had no need of a new man in my life, but I sensed such yearning beneath his spirited tone and adventurous tales that it seemed heartless to turn my back on him without giving him a second chance. Thomas was 129 years old the day I was born, and 175 when we met. But he will remain forever younger than me, since he died at 39, whereas I'm still going strong, apparently. The fact that he's dead is no bar to his speaking to me, nor to anyone else for that matter. He made sure of this during his lifetime, the first slide we saw, by treating his personal journals as his talking papers. And talk they certainly do, in 5 volumes totaling almost 3,000 pages, sprinkled with whimsical watercolours, some of which you'll see behind going through. These extraordinary journals came my way by serendipity. An acquaintance from Devon, a librarian, while attending a meeting in the British Library in the spring of 1999, had happened to notice a manuscript volume in a showcase. It was open at a page with an amusing watercolour entitled Indigo Planters After Tiffin. He glanced at the label. It described the volume as written by a Victorian, Thomas Machell, quotes, midshipman in the Merchant Navy and indigo planter. So that single word indigo sparked the librarian, because he'd previously supplied me with books for my indigo studies. So indigo was the bait that lured me to Thomas, though he waited long enough to reel me in. I had been hooked by indigo one summer's day, when in the granite courtyard of an old Devon farmhouse in England, I fed a white cloth deep into an indigo dye vat, pulled it out minutes later, can't see, and watched its colour transform in the air from yellow through turquoise to midnight blue. I resolved there and then to discover more about this magical and most universal dye stuff, unaware that the hook was in for life, that I would pursue indigo all over the world until Thomas caught me and took over. Then I had to pursue him all over the world. And that's the sort of introduction, and then I go straight back into 1850 when I first connect with his journals and first see them in the library, and as soon as I read them, I'm in Bengal in 1850, and I don't know which time I'm in by the time I've finished. So...
Taking from the image that you just spoke about two sahibs sitting on the table with the pankha on the top, and yesterday you just mentioned about that perspective, which was, I think, very interesting. And also, in the book there are a lot of mentions about Thomas dressing up as an Arab and trying to study various religions and languages. And I think a very pertinent question in today's time about, religious tolerance, which he was trying to pursue.
Actually, his book has become, it's funny how stories change, don't they? Even since I started the book, his different things that I thought were important have come to light, and his searching, his spiritual searching, and his plea for religious tolerance is much more pertinent now than it was when I found the journals 15 years ago. So many of the talks, we just heard another one just now. He was the son of a vicar, so he was born Christian and born, living in very much a church in his background. He came out to India and he discovered that there were, the other religions opened his eyes. He had a Hindu pandit come into his house. He had a Muslim teacher, because of this, when he came down to Calcutta, which actually he loathed, not because of Calcutta, but because it was known as the City of Palaces, as you know, but he calls it the City of Pale Faces, because his own community, the British, every door was closed to him, as he calls it, because it's infra dig, as he says himself, to fraternize so closely with the natives, to the extent that he had a lot of Arab friends because of this amazing journey, who actually stayed with him. So when he came to Calcutta, nobody would have him to live in his house except a box swallow married to an Anglo-Indian. He said they're the kindest people in the world, and he was well born. I mean, it wasn't, but it was because of his attempt at this meeting of unions, and he did this extraordinary journey, actually. He practices Arabic, he practices Hindi, he learns Bengali, and he keeps his Christian origin, but he says all these religions are the same. I can't understand. He said we're all searching for the same truth. And one of his journeys is remarkable because he comes down to Kolkata, he's going to go home on leave, and he decides it's very boring to travel on a British ship. He's learned Arabic by then. He's actually he calls himself puny because he was never supposed to travel because he was an outsider and born with a birth defect, as he calls it. So luckily he has black hair, and his one asset is his long black beard, so he can travel incognito with Arabs. He dresses a la Mughal, as he calls it. He books himself onto an Arab ship. There are images that will come up of the paintings of Calcutta. And his uncle sends him the Bible in Arabic from Yorkshire in England. And he travels for 6 months with Arab merchants. Nobody knew he was doing it. He wasn't famous. He was painting away, staying in caravanserais. Of course, on the ship they knew, but he went into Yemen during war. They thought he was Persian. Everywhere he went, he was taken as an Arab. Unbelievable, really. And he sits on the ship and he says the most strict Muslims who think we're all infidels are really surprised when I read the Bible to them and discover how much we have in common. And he says we're going to have trouble in the future if we don't use education and teach all. They say, why are you interested in our religion? He said, we have to study each other's religions. And it's so pertinent today. In his way, I mean, it sounds really heavy going. The book actually isn't, I don't think, because it's a story, and it's my story of the search for him. And he had a tremendous sense of humor and sense of irony. I mean, I'm getting really heavy going now. But he was remarkable, because he wasn't Richard Burton or somebody famous. And his diaries nearly got lost at sea, and he got distemper in the Red Sea. He goes into Jeddah and talks about the Sunni-Shia split and how intolerant that is. He says, watch out for the Wahhabis. He gets boarded by a Wahhabi pirate. I went on the same journey, and we also went on pirate watch. It was the same descendants. They were Al-Qaeda in Yemen just starting. It's really become more relevant than it was when I wrote it.
What would be his take if he was there today?
He would be amazed, because he would say, come on, 150 years later, a bit more, 165, you now are connected in a way he would have loved, because he's a great communicator. He's only writing these journals and painting and everything because he hasn't got a camera. He would love Instagram and Twitter and email. And he would say, but there's no need for intolerance now because you've got the internet, you're all connected and globally. What is going on? And it really makes me think, what's happened? How come? We now all know, that there's no excuse now, actually. So why is it we're going the other way? It really is something that torments me and would have absolutely baffled him.
In his journals, we often see, there are glimpses of some sort of a shame and humiliation in his childhood, which makes him take that leap and jump into the world which he started exploring, and that's why probably the book is there.
Yes, I think it's because of his childhood and because of his so-called birth defect. So he was destined to push a quill in an office in a very nice, comfortable houses in England. There was no need for him to travel. Nobody listened to him in the family. He wasn't going to go in the church like the elder brother. He wasn't going to go in the army because of his birth defect and also his personality, I think. He was too gentle. So he was going to push a quill in an office. Nobody listened to a word he said in the family. So he ran away from home at 12 with his tough little younger brother who got wind of this, who was 8. They went the whole length of Britain, a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. He couldn't jump onto a ship because he was stuck with his younger brother, but then his father listened and said, I see you want to travel, you're not really suitable for it, but I can't stop you. And then at 16 he went off. He was always an outsider. I think he was lame, actually. I know he was hugely teased and bullied on the ship. He was called Smike from the character in Dickens. He was small, puny, limped, can you imagine, on a tough merchant ship. But nothing deterred him, and even when he got cholera, malaria, everything else, he would go home for 2 years. He said, my destiny, my land, land of pilgrimage is India. He pushes himself back. He's iller and iller. Even the last year, he's home, and he's really sick by then. As soon as he gets better, he's back on a ship again. He's going to make something of his life. Nobody listened to him. He wrote his journals to his father. He wanted his father to take him seriously. They're actually they're wonderful because they're written to you. So when you pick them up, he says, I'm sitting on a steamy estate. I wish you were here, basically. Full of empathy. He's moving in a very modern writing. The empathy is extraordinary. He does what's now termed magic realism, gets into the heads of other people. You referred to that first picture. He's only 23, and he can already imagine his painting is painted as if he was the punkawalla looking at him. That is quite remarkable, to even notice the poor people, let alone imagine how slightly absurd he was looking as a Westerner, with his feet on the table, with a Frenchman smoking a cheroot under the punkah. And the rope of the punkah goes down through the page, and that's the perspective is from the punkawalla. It's somewhere, it comes up here. He was the only white man to go up into he wasn't going to be deterred. He has an incredible determination. Because of being an outsider.
Yeah, did this determination come from being, not taken seriously by the family, being spurred by younger brothers? I mean, there's a chapter, I think, which is particularly very, very moving when his younger brother just spits out all his venom on him.
Yeah. Yes, his younger brother did everything right in those terms of the Raj. He was the second best polo player in India. I wonder who the best first was. He got medals for fighting in the in Punjab. He was in Peshawar leading. He was in the Bengal Horse Artillery. And what destroyed Thomas actually was the fact he had 3 brothers during the mutiny, the so-called mutiny, Sepoy uprising, who were doing the usual terrible Raj things. And so they did, in terms of that society at that time, they were the ones who were doing everything right. And he felt inadequate all the time. And I think he wants to prove to his father that...
Do you think he kind of understood this shame and humiliation of colonized India because of his... the way he was being treated by,
yes,
a larger, narrative, of course.
Yeah, well, the Indigo thing is notorious, of course. The Indigo name in Bengal, that's a classic example of his. So he ends up working in Indigo with the only known philanthropist, and even when they did after the so-called Blue Mutiny, which came 2 years after the Sepoy uprising, when they did the reports on it, they actually call James Forlong, his boss, the white sheep among black, and he says himself, we are awful, most of us. I'm hearing terrible stories. We grind down the workers. They will rise up. There's a limit to how much we can do. Do I stay in this industry and try and mitigate it a bit, or do I leave? He grapples with his conscience in the journals. He will only work for James Forlong. He emulates him because James Forlong has a hospital on his estate.
Even a school.
A school. Yeah. And he starts a school on his little estate in his minor way. He's a very minor character from that point of view. And then actually everything's changed when he gets cholera. And then he changes tack in his life then. But he's very critical of colonialism in the Marquesas Islands, where he also goes. He isn't just in India. He has his other episodes. His great love affair.
His love affair, yeah.
Being Thomas, of course, no white person, I think, would have wanted to marry him. He, hadn't got a steady income, he was freelance, like me. And also with they couldn't dance and so on. But when he went to the Marquesas, he had the wonderful free relationship. He fell in love with a Marquesan beauty, a cannibal chief's daughter. Now this says something for him. They were taking coal from Newcastle to the Marquesas to fuel the French steamers. And he's vitriolic about colonialism. The French had killed the 3 sons of this cannibal chief. So there's this young white man, who'd think the cannibal chief would loathe, going right up into the jungles of the Marquesas, the most remote archipelago on Earth in the Polynesia. I went in his footsteps by cargo ship from Tahiti. It's 3 days sailing to the Marquesas. Beautiful islands, volcanic. And he learns the language, falls in love with the beauty, I thought it might be on, but it's not. This is Bengal. His sketches and my photographs in the same villages. Learns the language, and actually at the end, the cannibal chief says, "Stay and marry my daughter," and he's tempted to stay, and that was his great love affair. And he says, "I don't know. He says some of these so-called savages are much more hospitable than anybody would be in my own country." He's very open-minded, so in his own society, he was very shunned.
Tell us about the love affair about him and you.
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons the book had many titles and is hard to categorize. Everybody else sees the book, and I was very resistant. My agent said, "Your subtitle should be My Love Affair with Thomas." My daughter, indignantly, who came with me on a crazy search for his grave, because even his grave was said to not exist in India, not exist in UK. He had an unknown grave. There were so many mysteries in the book.
Yeah, the kind of hardships you took, the kind of travels you took, the kind of pain and patience you had to just go and follow his footsteps. It's surely a love affair.
It's a compulsion anyway. My younger brother once said, "Oh God, Jenny," because you said about why did he write. Where did these compulsions come from? I mean, my brother said, "You're a driven woman." Yes, I mean, there's something between... I mean, love affair is not quite the right word, you see. I sort of got bristled. I got very cross with my agent. I said, "No, it's not. It's a historical book." And I'm right. He said, "No, it's not. It's a love affair between you across time." It depends how you call love, I suppose. It's a big definition of love. And it should be... I'd probably sell it a million times more. And I was thinking that maybe, when the paperback comes out, it should just be called A Love Affair Across Time. And I'd probably sell a million more copies, I'm slightly resistant because there's so much else going on in the book. But nevertheless, I had an absolute yearning to do the opposite of biography. I wanted to get to know this attractive young man, attractive in the sense of his personality, the outsider, the seeker. I was really attracted to all that. And his spiritual search really gripped me.
You some way, really wanted to immortalize Thomas.
Yes, and I didn't realize how much. And even here, pushing. I've become much more pushy since this book came out, and it's because of him. Because this time he's going to be heard, and I think this time nobody listened to him at the time. He was sidelined. He was ahead of his time, and I thought, I'm damn well. It's almost like him. He's going to be listened to. So when I actually was waiting for the first copy to come, it didn't come. I went off to seaside town. So my daughter arrived, and my daughter opened the package and photographed the cover, and I was on the cliffs of Cornwall walking, and ping into my text message came a picture of the book. And I actually shouted out loud to the sea, because sea is a great theme in my life and his. "I've done it. I've got you out there." And it was like, whether I sell 10 copies or 20 or what, he's there now. It's in print. His name's actually, there's been loads of articles about him. His name is getting known in UK. I mean, it's been so well reviewed and well received. I didn't know how it was going to be received. I was amazed, actually, what's happened. I've done it this time. They're not journals languishing in the library. He's out in the world and people are listening. They should have listened before, and then he might not have had so much trouble that we're having today, actually. But this time I've done it for him. Yes.
You in fact went to the extent of past life regression session to actually find out. Were you trying to trace your own identity at some point of time?
Not at all. I mean, the whole book is serendipity and intuition. And I was resistant to anything which I call wacky in the West. Of course, the lovely thing about coming to India is that these things are more accepted. And I was expecting male reviewers in major newspapers in UK possibly to say, I call it my wacky bits, she's a bit sort of airy-fairy, what a pity she didn't stick to her standard sort of slightly more academic.
Indigo.
Yeah, and all that. It didn't happen. And I think it's because I tell this story, it's called a detective story, because the last 6 years of his life were missing. So the journals end in 1856, which is maddening, because I wanted to know what happened during the mutiny and so on, the uprising. Must be careful what I say. So I had to piece it together in other ways. And this last diary entry in the British Library, 1856, on a coffee plantation in southern India. So I thought, well, being me, I always have to go to places. I can only feel things when I'm there. Some people, I have A.M. Wilson, who loves this book. He's a famous historian in England on the Victorian times. Writes the major works on Queen Victoria. He'd never been to India, but he's a huge expert on Queen Victoria. He's not a traveller. I'm the opposite. So I thought I need to go where he wrote the last diary entry on this coffee plantation. And also I was in my own footsteps as usual, because when I found the journals, I had already done his footsteps. That was the thing. I'd already been in the Arab world where he'd been. I'd even been to university in York, and he lived near Yorkshire. I mean, there were coincidences after coincidences, if you call them that. So down to southern India, to a coffee plantation where I was when I was 18 years old, 5 miles from where he'd been, opening them up, and I was on the last British one to close. I thought, I don't know what I was looking for. It was one of those there's so many daft journeys in the book, ridiculous. I can see that. This sort of obsessive search. So I go down, expecting what? To find documents I don't know what I was looking for. I just had to be there. And by a series of coincidences, I met someone, many people have heard of her, Krishna Kumar. Ratna, I can't remember, I got her wrong name now. Rashna Imhasli Gandhi, married to Bernard Gandhi, a great correspondent in Delhi, Swiss foreign correspondent. She's a Jungian psychotherapist. We only met because my husband had a bad foot and we were 3 days delayed. So we have.
Even I think meeting him was such a coincidence.
Total.
I mean her, sorry.
Yeah, total coincidence. And we got talking over lunch.
You were almost leaving the guest house when she arrived.
We were leaving. We were leaving after breakfast, and the doctor said, "Oh, you're so British. You're so boring. You're not. Why be in such a hurry? Why not have lunch? Take your time. You'll still get to Telecherry." And I was thinking, "Oh God, we're already 3 days late. I want to go, but I didn't want to seem boringly British." So I said yes, and then up came Rashna, and we had lunch together, and we were talking before lunch, and she said, "Tell me about what you're doing." So I told her a bit, and she looked at me and said, "There's something going on between you and this young man." I said, "Oh, really?" I was not looking to do a past life regression. I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I do past life regression when people are ready for it." And so we discussed it a bit, and she said, "I think there's something between you and this young man." And we discussed it over lunch, and she said it takes 4 days, so that was out of the question. And then my husband said, "Maybe you should go and meet her in Switzerland sometime." I knew it would never happen, and we calculated we could do 3 days if we started that afternoon. We changed our plans again and cleared the decks of stuff. And so I found myself staying on this coffee plantation, as it was, amazingly, doing a 3-day past life regression with Rashna, who is amazing. She's written 2 books, The Psychology of Love and The Emerging Feminine, last year. Many people may have heard of her here. And I was not looking to do it, but I did. And it was another, part of the journey. And I think the reason that it is accepted by kind of even all the reviewers who don't believe in it is because I tell my whole story in the book of my search for Thomas. I don't interpret. It happened. I did do the fast life. I then wrote the last 6 years of his life. From that, she said more would come, and indeed it did when I wrote it.
Yeah, I think in the whole book we see you after I think the regression session, you started saying a lot of things about his last few years, which was validated by the letters which you found much later, and those were the exact things which you had said earlier.
Everything because
it was almost spooky. I mean, when
you said it gave you goosebumps. You're not the first one to have said that. Quite fun to give people goosebumps. I have quite a few who say that. Yes, it was extraordinary, because I came back then to England, having done the past life regression, went back to the library, found a few more facts, and then I was driving along in the car, listening to some music, and I suddenly thought, I know what happened to him.
So these, visions would just come to you?
And I knew historically that he's almost bound to be in the coffee plant. He hadn't been there very long, so that during the so-called Indian Mutiny uprising, that he was in southern India. So I sat down and started writing it, and it wasn't like automatic writing that people have from someone else, but I wanted to write it in his persona, but it wasn't a pastiche either. I mean, the style is sort of his style, but I wasn't pastiching it. That's the way I wanted to write it, and it became an I. And very clear in the book when I'm doing this. I don't blur the boundaries. So the last 6 years of his life, as it were, he describes through me. He just didn't want to be in. It just didn't work. And in my mind, I saw him in Kolkata, and I felt him having a nervous breakdown. And I visualise now the flat, looking down on the streets and seeing all the soldiers coming past to fight for the uprising. And I described, or he describes, this breakdown he has and so on. And then I went on to the end of his life. And then, yes, it was later. Everything in the book, it was real serendipity. Every discovery came when I needed it, and not before. So the famous boxes in the attic, which every biographer dreams of, did turn up. But after I'd done the past life regression, after I'd written the last 6 years, then these boxes turn up in the attic and the borders. There's a whole thing about borders in the book. Bangladesh, East and West Bengal. This was the borders of Wales and England. There's a lot of borders. I love borders. I love that bit in between the borders. That's what I think I probably write about. And every single thing that I had said was actually recorded in the family books, which he himself wrote, actually. And it was bizarre, because I think that stopped the critics maybe criticizing me, because I'd already written this stuff. And then the facts turned up, and I burst into tears, actually. There was this book, and in his hand, he said, I was very ill, I couldn't work, I had to go back to Calcutta, and he doesn't, of course, call it a breakdown then, but it's quite clear. He had another one in Peshawar with his brother when he felt so inadequate. And everything I'd written was recorded later. But I'd already seen it under past life regression, so I don't know. That's what I thought in the West, anyway. I might be considered a bit wacky, and that's a reason I needed to have the so-called academic career and the PhD and all that sort of stuff. I think it made it harder for people to be so critical. I needed that career behind me.
Even I think finding his grave was such a coincidence.
Finding his grave.
And you going through all those strange experiences of yours, crossing the border from Bangladesh.
Oh gosh.
And
yes.
Even taking a ship ride dressed as a male sailor, right?
Not quite, but I traveled by container ship, which in 2010.
I mean, what made you go through all of that?
Adventure. I love having adventures. And I always think I'm quite a careful traveller. Of course, you never are. I mean, you try and be careful and try not to put yourself in ridiculous situations because you think you're far more sensible and so on. But you end up in them. So you end up in a taxi with a safe driver. The next minute, people are piling in the front. You don't know what they're saying. And the next minute, we were dumped by the side of the roadside. That was a bad experience. Had a few of those. But I'm not actually very. People say you're so intrepid. I'm actually not. I'm rather fearful. I'm frightened of dangerous. I'm frightened of flying. I'm actually slightly frightened of all this. It's like, but I love traveling. So if you're going to travel, then you have to do all this stuff. Because the travel and the adventure overrides the fear of dangerous cargo journeys and things. And as my daughter always says, when your time's up, your time's up. And whenever I'm frightened, that goes through my head. I can't stay in England. I always think of the head of Body Shop, I think it was. She travelled all over the world, but how did she die? Falling downstairs in her house. And I always think of that. I'm going to slip on my wooden staircase at home if I stay there. So I might as well fly and everything and take the risks, because it's always the daft things that get you in the end. You can't avoid them.
True. I'd like to go back a little bit in the book about the Opium War, I think, which was a very, very significant, even Amitabh Ghosh, that they mentioned about the war, how that war has actually changed the history of the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, the story is my search for Thomas, but I met someone, a great biographer, a few years ago, and he said the future of biography, not that it is quite, but it is in a way, is unimportant characters in very important times historically. And one of the keys for Thomas, living through this height of the Raj, he ended up by mistake seeing the entire Opium War as a teenager. He was on a merchant shipping on the ship. He came out at 16 to Kolkata. He was just about to go home. His ship became a troop ship. So suddenly he is witnessing, he sees Hong Kong as he can't get off the ship because he can't get any other jobs. He's only 16, no experience, got a limp. He's stuck on the ship. He sees Hong Kong as a fishing village. He sees the entire Opium Wars as a teenager, very humble, rowing troops ashore. He sees the signing of the Treaty of Nanking. He sees Hong Kong, amazing description when he goes back 2.5 years later. And all the go-downs have been built in 2.5 years and so on. These are crucial periods. Now, Amitav Ghosh was saying he thinks the Opium Wars are as critical, really, as the French Revolution was to European history, and actually not known about enough. And this Thomas's eyewitness account and amazing watercolors and so on of every battle. His captain was a very good sailor. His ship very often led. This is in the research in Yemen. His ship often led the ships. There's illustrations everywhere, and this eyewitness account of these crucial battles, and this viewpoint again. It's an incredible historical record, actually. And in fact, they're going to teach it in schools. And Amitav Ghosh was saying that actually it still underpins today Britain's relationship with China. It's really there, raw, as is, the Sepoy Uprising. These things, these historical events, we need to know about them. And actually in British schools, they're choosing actually the Sepoy Uprising and the Opium Wars as key things to teach. They used to just teach Henry VIII, and all that, very European. And now they're moving to changing the curriculum because these things really matter in today's relationships. And he was eyewitness, again,
all of that.
with little charming watercolors. Being Thomas, he goes to the villages and paints all the costumes and everything.
And you say that he never considered himself as an artist.
No, that was thank God he didn't have a camera. Again, he's in awe of the, Daniels and all the great artists and Hodges. He's just a chap who nobody listens to, who wants to, again, to communicate. So he draws himself having his hand washed, dressed as an Arab. He draws the lamps. He just wants Dad to know what life is like. These are the people. They wear these fabulous clothes. This is what a mosque looks like. This is what the fish look like. The harbour at Muscat when we're coming in. The ships are like this.
And all the while he was doing it for his dad.
Basically, yes, he was actually. He wanted to communicate. He wanted to communicate with somebody. He would have been I can tell you, he would have been tweeting and everything like mad. He wanted to communicate, and he wanted somebody to listen. Actually, he knew he could write, but nobody else listened. He's a brilliant writer. I've read excerpts at readings. You could hear a pin drop. His description of nearly drowning in a shipwreck and during the Opium Wars is absolutely dramatic writing, and his empathy. Is there time for one example? So being Thomas, he sits one day on his plantation, Indigo plantation, and he says to his father, I haven't got much to write about, it's very slack time, I haven't been travelling, I've told you about this. I'm going to tell you about all the ships they go up and down the Hooghly River. So every page he paints one of the ships. And he said, this one carries opium and indigo, this one's for this is a local ship. This ship, he says, this particular ship is the kind of ship that the Europeans travel down from the indigo plantations and up from Murshidabad down to Kolkata. And he says, look at this ship, Europeans travel on it. Now on this ship is a European planter. He's very sick, he's asleep. And he's dreaming of home, he's dreaming of this. So he goes on he says he's dreaming of this, that and the other. And he says in the diaries, it's extraordinary writing. It's not always to you, the father. Sometimes it's to us. So he says, let's leave him asleep. Poor guy. He thinks he's going to get home to his village. He's not. He's going to die at sea and be buried at sea, a sailor's grave, as it were. But let's leave him to his dreams, poor guy. And so he can't just paint the ship. He has to imagine who's on it and what that man is dreaming. I mean, that's actually magic realism, which, we revere Borges and people for. He just did it automatically. He was a natural writer. And again, I'm damn well getting it out this time. I haven't finished with him because I could only have excerpts in the book, and there's a lot more to be done, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. Right. That now you found Thomas, and you actually, when I was reading once you found the grave, I thought that was it.
Yes.
I mean, what is next?
Well, it's so visual, actually. Some people are saying you should write. The Opium Wars could be a whole book, actually, and so could the travel in the Arab world. But I think it's very visual. So there's two things. I would like to have an exhibition. Well, who's a filmmaker? Yes. People always say there's a wonderful film in it, but you first find your filmmaker. There's a sense of doing possibly a co-edition with an Indian publisher. It would be a dream as well, possibly with a lot more illustrations. I'd like to link it with something more visual. You tell me. You've read it. I feel the visual stuff and the illustrations haven't been. I needed to get the story out, so the illustrations are in sections. They were going to be all over the book. It became too whimsical and too complicated. And the readers like A.M. Wilson, I really revere, and my agent in London, as it was then, they all said, careful with this book. You need to get that story out, your discovery of these journals, his life, your detective story. Don't mess it up. So there's enough illustrations to show how wonderful they are, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. What do you think?
I think it's going to be such a fantastic film.
Right,
honestly.
any filmmakers there? Please do a film. Find millions of pounds. And
One last
Yeah.
question to you, Jenny, and probably then we'll open up to the audience. Thomas keeps going back and coming back to Calcutta,
Yeah.
especially Bengal, and you do the same thing. What is the connection?
Oh, I blame Thomas. Well, I think it's the people. I mean, he grew to really love the Bengali country. He didn't like Calcutta or white Calcutta because of the way he was received by his society. He wanders a lot up into, according to Sumitra Das, and he wrote a piece in the Telegraph when I last came out in 2010. He says he's the only known white person to gone up into. There's a picture came up to go up into what they call black Calcutta then, Indian Calcutta, and draw Indian. He was fascinated, and I think he loved it because it was I love Bengal because it's gentle. He was a gentle soul. I feel it's much more gentle. It's full in the land of I love poetry. My husband was a poet, my late husband. The land of Tagore, for heaven's sake, filmmakers, artists, more gentle people. And so many, two of my closest friends are in the audience here. One Bengal, well, you. I mean, I have so many friends here. I feel like it's my second home, is what he said too. I just feel I'm coming home, and I don't feel... I was thinking yesterday, I was sitting in an audience, I looked around, I think I was the only probably the only white person in the audience, and I don't feel it. I feel completely at home. If I was maybe sitting in an African country, I might feel very much the distinction. I'm sure you do, looking at me, but I don't when I'm here. I just feel blending into the wrong word, because obviously don't. I haven't got black hair like Thomas, but...
It's in the spirit, I guess.
Yes, it is the home of, it's the home of artists and creators and things. I love that. And it's more gentle and slower paced. And,
would anybody like to ask questions to Jenny?
Is it? There's one there, there's one there, and one there. There's one there as well, and one there. Just waiting for the mics. I know it's really annoying if there's questions asked without a mic, isn't it? Yeah.
In your whole experience of traveling around trying to find Thomas Machell, did you ever was there any point where you faced a difficulty that made you want to stop pursuing him?
Yes, there were sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I have a love-hate relationship sometimes with the travel. When we had all our luggage stolen on the Bangladeshi-Bengal border, I thought it was a pretty low point, actually. But it never made me stop. Actually, the worst thing, if I'm being personal for a minute, and this is something you said in the book that underlines the book, but I don't go into it. When my late husband died, I couldn't write for a bit. And I thought, actually, nothing mattered. When you're close to somebody and they die, it puts the perspective of your life changes, and I just wanted to die myself. And writing and books and things seemed so irrelevant then. So I had quite a hiatus for a couple of years. I couldn't write at all. I actually picked the book up again on the container ship, back on the sea, back into Thomas again. So that was the low point for me, when I didn't give a damn about anything much at that point. Yeah.
A very good afternoon to both of you. I'm Orusharko Banerjee, and I'm currently doing a dissertation on the opium trade, and your talk has been very much enlightening for me. So could you please tell some more about Thomas's opium as a witness to the opium wars? Could you enlighten us a bit on it?
Yes, and actually the whole opium indigo rivalry is interesting, because the indigo growers in Bengal, I'm not quite answering this, but they were privateers, whereas the opium growers on the whole, as Amitav Ghosh said on the boat, probably over half the city of London is based on opium. There were so many vested interests in London, so the opium was very much, people in government were behind it. So there's smear campaigns in London really against the indigo plants, not that they were any better, but because they loathe the rival, because they grew on the same ground. So, at one point, until about 1850, indigo was half the stuff coming through the exports through Calcutta were indigo. Hence the Neil Hut, the tea auction house today, the biggest in India, is still called the Indigo Auction House because it started for indigo. so actually the rivalry between indigo and opium is interesting. Yeah, and the opium, it was a terrible episode in British, it's really shaming. So was the indigo. Pushing opium on China in order to be able to acquire her silks, because nobody wanted the British woolens and so on, which are our great export. It was an extremely bad period, and even Thomas calls it this cruel but necessary war. Even he, in his time, had the line that we had to do that war, which is quite surprising for Thomas. So it just shows he bought into some of the propaganda. But it's just the eyewitness account of how brutal it was. Even General Gough, who was, as I say in my journal, he actually chose to be a soldier. Thomas didn't. He was forced into it. Says himself, I'm sick of heart at the brutality. And the whole way that war was waged, if you think, it reminded me of the Iran-Iraq war. It was shock and awe, because, we had, just like the West in Iraq, it was easy to win the war because we just had this superior, we decimated Saddam Hussein's air power in Iraq, so it was easy to win the war, not the peace, by bombing. And it was the same thing. The British had that one ship, which was a steamship. It changed the war completely. And that whole description of how the war worked and why it was won by the steamship, so it was a shallow berth, therefore it could land troops quickly. It's all in the diaries, and it's an amazing account. And those wars are they are important. They were a huge humiliation on China and a very shameful period in Raj history, actually. But to have this eyewitness account from somebody who's sort of sympathetic to all sides and became a pacifist, of course, at that time. He often says in the diaries, he describes terrible brutality. He says, I have to pass over this. I can't even describe it.
I think we just have time for just one more question.
Mic for him, please. My name is Gautam, and I have your book with me.
Good.
Thank you very much for this astonishing account.
Can't quite hear.
Thanks a lot for giving us such an astonishing account of Bengal in particular. Although Machell had the world view in front of him. And I think this is one of the rare accounts, apart from Goldsworthy Grant, that really goes into the details of rural Bengal at that time, and especially into the Bengali psyche also, to some extent. My question is about the book. You traveled to Machell's factory location, and you couldn't find it. I'm sorry to learn about this. And this place is called Rudarpur. Do you have any plan to follow up your expedition with another in Bangladesh or in Bengal side?
When the film happens, we'll go back, or the filmmakers will, to all these places. Because so many of them are still there. That particular one wasn't, the one that he loved the most. Probably because it was a very humble one, not like the great, big estates of the masters. And I found buildings that he still drew nearby. Temples and things, they're still there, which is wonderful to see. I was on. It'd be great to go back, but it'd be nice to go back in a different way, not just to go back again to look. For I know it's because I've done that. I wish at the time because we didn't have videos and things then. I wish we'd videoed it even to go back in an amateur way. It'd be nice to film these places now in some way or another, even amateurly.
Some of the places have not yet changed. The scenes may be the same, perhaps.
Absolutely, and actually there were some pictures there going to the villages. He absolutely loved the Bengali countryside. Just got such a deep love for it, and the nature and the people. And that was another thing. He wouldn't, when all his compatriots, when they were going pig sticking, they laughed at him because he went to local weddings and local puppet shows. Why do you want to go to a puppet show? He loved all the local village life, mad about it. And so, yes, and I've been up to these villages and seen the same. It would be lovely to do more on that. And actually that book, Rural Life, by Goldsworthy Grant, he says it's a bit dry himself, because he knew him. He stayed on the same plantation. Goldsworthy Grant stayed on his boss's plantation, and Thomas laughs about him a bit. He admires him, his drawing, but finds him a pedantic man and says he's a bit humorless. So there's a human side even there.
We'll look forward to a sequel to this book.
Oh, right. See which way it goes next. I never plan my life. It's all serendipity.
Thank you, Jenny, for this wonderful afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.